Welcome back, players. I'm Jack with 36 Cancel, and this is Coco the Weiss Cat. So today we're looking at something a little different. This is our deck tech for Yamikan. So what's that? Well, Yamikan is what you'd call the meta deck from To Love Ru, so it's the basic shell of the most popular deck from the set. As the uncreative name suggests, it features Yami and Mikan as its main heroines, and thus is yellow and green. The deck was big in Japan for a while before it was released in English, and people were really excited to see it. In fact, a lot of people thought it was going to dominate the English meta when To Love Ru dropped in America. And it placed for a bit, but it didn't have nearly as big of an impact as people imagined. In fact, almost a year later, it's kind of uncommon. The big staples are kind of hard to find, and they're pretty up there in price, at least for now. So, what's this deck about? Well, let's break it down. And for this, we'll go back to those important scores: skill, consistency, and power. And when we get into it, we'll analyze the deck's level 0, 1, 2, and 3 game. So let's just jump in. Right away, you'll see that the level 0 game has some weird attributes. First, there's not a ton of power here. A lot of the level 0s aren't really here to act like a wall. Instead, they act more like a gambit. Take this sitting Yui for example. As long as there's only one other character, she boosts it, and she's a clock switch reverser. There's a lot of reasons why someone might not want to run into this level 0, and it's not because of her power. And the same goes for this sitting Maya. She's just a 1k level 0, but when she dies, you can pay 1 and put her into your clock. If you do, top check 2 and put 1 card in your hand. So it's another gambit card. Does your opponent want to enable you to clock yourself on your terms? Does he want to add a card to your hand, or allow you to pay out a stock? It's weird for sure, but it's techie. It's guaranteed yellow in your clock, and you can use it to potentially put a climax or event in your hand. So, what about this sitting Yami? Well, it's another techie level 0. It has 2k base power, and it gets plus 1k whenever you play another character. When it reverses its opponent, you can resonate with this Yami to move another character to your backstage in the rest position. So, that looks something like this. You can play this Yami, then play some other level 0. Then the Yami gets bigger. You attack with the other character, then attack with the Yami, and reverse her opponent. And when you do, just reveal this other Yami, and you can move that first level 0 to the back row. Interesting, right? It allows for some cool plays since you can move an already reversed card this way. In fact, it even lets you trip up level 0 reversers by throwing something in front of them and then saving it. It can even let you swing with back row characters and then move them where they're supposed to be. And this deck has 2 of those at level 0. One is this sitting Mikan. And by the way, if you haven't noticed, a lot of this level 0 spends most of its time on its ass. She lets you meal the top 3 cards of your deck when she comes in. She's a front to sister for 500, and she's also an anti-salvage card. That said, if your opponent salvages during the attack phase of his turn, all his characters get -3 soul. So this is a pretty good card. It's kind of like the Hatsukase from Kantai Collection, so it hates out gate climaxes and salvage combos, and its usefulness and utility is pretty self-explanatory. There's also a somewhat generic pay 1 pitch 1 search Yami. She gives something 1500 when she comes in, so she's not terrible. So she's a standard inclusion. And the last level 0 in this suite is this cute pajamas Mikan. She's a tap 2 brainstormer with a come into play ability. When you play her, you can discard a card. If you do, you can choose a trans or housework character in your clock and put it into your hand. Then you put the top card of your deck into your clock. So, discard 1 and clock salvage, then clock yourself. More weird utility. If you really want to dirtle around, you can play the sitting Maya first turn, use her ability when she's reversed, and then get her back with this Mikan next turn and play her again. Though, that's not really what you want to do. What this card does is allow you to clock some level 1s or 2s you might not be able to afford in your hand, but do want eventually. And if you're level 3, and your opponent clock hit your finishers, this is a cool way to get them back. So, let's cap off this level 0. My analysis? It's weird. A lot of these cards have the potential to do some really good things, or really bad things, like clock climaxes and eat stock. It has a clock reverser and an anti-salvage, which are really the 2 best cards in the suite. The rest are really techie and situational. Overall, I give it a 6 out of 10, and that score is generous because of the 2 back row cards. Without them, the level 0 might be a 5 or even a 4. But it's hard to rate since using them properly is so difficult. And we'll talk about that at the end, because, spoiler alert, this deck is not an easy ride, but we'll save that. For now, let's move on to the level 1. So this is an interesting level 1 game. As you can see, it's a healthy mix of Mikan and Yami. And the level 1 game actually has 2 climax combos. So let's focus on the Mikan first. This is putting away closed Mikan. She's basically a 1-0 5500 with a climax combo to switch her on reverse. Nothing too exciting here, but she's a good chunk of your game plan and setup. The climax she combos with is this Taiyaki keychain, which actually also interacts with this Yami. She's another back row character that assists for hand encore, and when you play Taiyaki keychain, you can boost something by 2k. Overall, not a bad back row. Moving on, this other Mikan also makes an appearance. She's a generic, high-power, low-cost body. Not much to say about her. So the last level 1s are over here. It all starts with this level 1 here, which actually has 2 change abilities. She can change to a level 2 assister, but that's not important. What is important is that you can pay 1, put a climax from your hand into your clock, and then put her into your clock. And if you do, you can put this Yami from your hand onto the stage. Yes, you heard that right. If you put a climax from your hand into your clock, and then put that card into your clock, you can play a level 3 at level 1. And that's not the half of it. When this Yami enters the battlefield, you get to draw 2 cards, then discard 1. And if all your characters are trans or housework, which, thanks to one of the most tragic translation choices made by Bushiroad, they are, she gets plus 1500 and can't be chosen by your opponent's effects. So that means this 10k level 3 body can't be anti-changed. And finally, the star on the Christmas tree, she has a climax combo with Gentle Time. When she attacks and Gentle Time is in the climax zone, she gives herself burn cancel and then gives it to somebody else when she attacks. We in the business call this not too shabby. So if you haven't guessed, this is kind of the meat and potatoes of this deck. What makes Yamikan so unique and so powerful is the ability to slam down this level 3 really early into the game. And besides just reversing it, there's not a ton that can be done about it. And if this other Yami, the one that gives characters hand encore, is behind it, you may as well forget about ever getting rid of her. Anything like this anti-change backup won't help you, because Yami can't be chosen by your opponent's effects. But let's pause a moment, because this is a rules question that's often confused or misinterpreted. And this nuance is why this Lightning Flash Asuna can get rid of Yami, and this anti-change backup can't. The key word here is choose. Yami can't be chosen by your opponent's effects, so when a card says something like choose one of your opponent's characters whose level is higher than your opponent's level, you're out of luck against Yami. But this Asuna doesn't say that. She says when this card's battle opponent becomes reversed, you may put that card into your opponent's stock. She doesn't choose the card, it's just what happens on reverse. So keep that in mind when you're using Yami or up against Yamikan itself. And consider that a freebie rules lesson from us at 3-6 Cancel. But without that kind of thing, Yami is tough to fight. But she's also a huge investment. Clocking a climax, then clocking the card you played means that you're out from your hand 2 cards. Then you play the Yami and draw 2 and pitch 1. So overall, you're down 2 cards, up 2 damage, and your hand has 1 less climax in it. That's a pretty high opportunity cost. But still, the idea of a level 3 at level 1 is pretty nutso. The only other set that can pull something like that off is Kill la Kill, and you won't see this Nui very often at all. But enough about that. For now, we need to wrap up a level 1 game, and to do that we need to visit this Maya. She's a 1-0 2k splittable backup. Short, sweet, and simple. And now that's done. Level 1 here has a lot of choices. You can lay out large bodies, you can climax combo to search, or you can put down level 3s. The thing is, while the signature move of Yamikan, which is laying down this level 3 Yami, is a really cool thing to do, the rest of the level 1 game is pretty average, and honestly, barely better than what's in the modern trial deck. This Mikan is no Zekken Yuki, and this other Mikan, for what it's worth, isn't a very big body. But of course, the main thing we need to focus on for this deck is Yami. And to break that down, we need to ask ourselves, what's the value of playing this particular level 3 at level 1 at this cost? Well, playing Yami lets you draw 2 and pitch 1, which is pretty good, but playing her out devastates your hand. You're down a climax, you're down 2 characters, and it leaves you with a really tough choice. What do you play in your other 2 center stage slots? Unless you're in the eye of the perfect storm, you're not going to be playing out 2 Yamis as soon as you hit level 1. And being down several cards, playing out a level 1 field is not easy. Maybe you could play out some putting away closed Mikans, but then do you play them with the Yami and then use your climax combo? Or do you play down some generic bodies and take advantage of the possible damage that the Gentle Time climax combo can get you with the Yami? All of this is esoteric and theoretical, but the point is, it's going to be tough to lay down an ideal field that your opponent will have a tough time dealing with, while also paying the hefty price this Yami demands to come out early. And what if you only have one climax in your hand? Well, swinging for a little bit of damage without that 1k1 when Yami comes out won't put you very far ahead, considering you've put yourself a lot closer to losing just to put her out. To summarize this part of the analysis, Yami is rough on your hand and board potential. So the cost is high, but what about the gains? How does your opponent deal with Yami? Or, the more important question is, does he have to? Sure, Yami is a body that's high in power and tough to reverse, but so what? When you can just maneuver or gear away from it, or get the climax combo off without reversing her, or just slam something into her and still do that damage, her board presence just doesn't seem like that big of a deal. I think the main problem with Yami is that, yeah, she's a 10k body on the field at level 1, but she's not very threatening on her own. Most of the time your opponent will just ignore the Yami if he knows what he's doing, and focus more on preying on your weakened hand and other center stage slots. So let's wrap this up. Yami is cool, but she's not a huge problem for your opponent. She's also not a huge boon for you. And the rest of level 1 barely passes the trial deck test. I rated a 6 out of 10. But hey, that's like my opinion, man. I think it's probably one of the more contentious ratings I'll make when I do these deck techs, and it's by no means the final word. Yamikan has one of the toughest level 1s to play correctly, and even with how much I've grinded games against my friends with it, I'm still not confident in a lot of my plays. So with that said, we move on to the level 2. The one card in the level 2 suite is this Mikan. She's a level assist and she has a free change into this other Mikan by discarding 2 characters. Her change ability is costly on your hand, like a lot of other parts of the deck, but she's a good stock saver. And she's flexible too. You can leave her in the back row as long as you want her to help you out. Overall, not amazing, but not bad either. I give it a 6 out of 10. And I'd go over the level 3 game here, but there's not much we haven't seen before. Oh look, it's Yami. But at least we can look at her a little differently now. Before, we were looking at her in the context of being alone on a field of level 1s. But now that we're looking at level 3, we can see how this acts with a full field of finishers. And of course, Yami is your main finisher in the deck. So we know that she draws 2 and pitches 1, and can't be the target of abilities, and is base 10k with burn cancel. But that burn cancel ability also goes to someone else when she attacks. So the idea of your finishing game is this. You attack with a Yami, she gets burn cancel, and then you give it to another character who hasn't attacked yet. And then you attack with another Yami, get burn cancel on her, and then give her burn cancel to your third attacker. So if you have 3 Yamis out, which is your ideal finishing board, you're going to get 5 instances of burn cancel. Each Yami gets one, and then gives one. If you have a third Yami out, she can't give her burn cancel to anyone else since she's your only other attacker, and Yami can't give the second instance of burn cancel to herself. Or it's likely that you'll have 2 Yamis and one of these beatstick healing Mikans out. Just remember not to attack with a Yami last, because if you do, there's an instance of burn cancel that you just can't hand out. So how much finishing power is that really? Well, it does ensure that at least some damage gets through, and with more instances of burn cancel than actual attacks, it's likely that they can hit a climax for you that might have cancelled a larger attack otherwise. Remember, when you're dealing burn cancel, or just burn 1 in general, it's good to hit a climax there so it's out of the way for your other attacks that are coming in for 3 or 4 damage. But the thing about burn cancel is it's not as powerful as extra attacks, and it's super conditional. And that's why Yami isn't the best at closing the game. But before we finish off and rate the level 3 game of Yamikan, there's one thing we need to touch on. Sure, there's Yami and Mikan, but there's also something a little different in this deck, and that's this event, Project Darkness. This deck plays 2 of those level 3 events, and they're an interesting way to make sure your opponent's finishing turn doesn't go according to plan. Now, this card is actually misprinted. Bushiroad has made the errata for this card widely available, so we're just going to show you the correct text that was meant to be there in the first place. And before the correction of a translation error, this card was a lot worse. It's a 3/3 backup event that boosts your character in battle by 1500, but that's not the important part. The crux of this card is that you can choose a character in battle on your opponent's side, and they can't deal damage to you this turn. That means that the auto effects that say deal 1 damage and even a character's attack can't do damage to you. So it basically nullifies a card's ability to hurt you that turn. The only thing it doesn't stop is Claw Kick, since that's not technically dealing damage. It's especially effective at dealing with restanding cards or ones that have reverse burn abilities. It's a really nice tool to have at your disposal at any rate. If you survive everything else and he's on his last attack, or you know you're out of climaxes and would die otherwise, this is a get out of jail free card. So that's our level 3 lineup. 7 characters and 2 events. The finishers are good, but not great. And unfortunately, the deck doesn't come with any cool utility level 3s. Just this healing beat stick. The event does make things more interesting though. Overall, I give the deck's level 3 a 6 out of 10 for lacking finishing power and utility. I'm not counting that Yami can come out at level 1 since we're just looking at level 3 in a vacuum here. But that said, let's get some fresh air and back up now that we know a lot more about the deck. What does it look like when you play it? Well, you're opening with a weaker level 0 game. You can use your early stock to keep your hand padded and then take some damage, but you might find yourself unable to deal with some of the better level 0s in the game. And here's where you have to make the decision. Are you setting up for early play Yami, or not? Well, if she's not in your hand by the time you clock yourself to level 1, which happens a lot in this deck, it's kind of risky to try to go for it. Instead, a lot of the Yamikan players favor going for a pure green level 1 setup while they open with strong Mikans. They perform the climax combo, and rely on the Maya backup to keep their field stable. Well, what about the Yami change? Here's an interesting tidbit. Yamikan took 3 big Bushiroad tournaments in 2017 out of several, and while they all ran 4 Yamis, none of them ran her level 1 change card. Collected and Calm Yami is in a lot of decks because it's fun and honestly a big part of the set. But it's just not good enough for the people who play the deck seriously. They run a few more level 0s and more naptime Mikans to garner some free advantage. In fact, with almost no level 2s and just 1 early change, green Mikan is the way the deck skates all the way into level 3. And with hand encore and high base power, it's not a terrible way to go either. Since none of the deck's level 1 suite costs stock, except for this back row, and hand encore is free, Yamikan is free to build up as much capital as it wants to move into level 3. And when it comes to level 3, Yamikan has pretty good insurance, but not amazing power. While the burn cancel is good, it's not too reliable. Though Project Darkness is a good way to keep yourself from dying. But being that Yamikan is a tougher deck to control compression with, it might not be enough. And Project Darkness certainly isn't impossible to play around, especially considering that auto abilities that help finish like Last Soch Xenon's attack burn or Kage Kai's clock kick aren't stopped by it. Generally, the deck's strategy might be to build some stock, and then play 2 Yamis and 1 Project Darkness over 2 turns. A third Yami is nice, but it only adds 1 more instance of burn cancel. If your level 3 game is in a weird spot, you can always use the deck's healthy draw power and clock switching to find what you need. And that's really it. So let's wrap this up with some ratings. We'll start with consistency. And when it comes down to that, Yamikan has a lot of options to get what it needs, but not a ton of deck control. It only has some basic search functions, but it does have options for clock and hand manipulation. With the sitting Maya, the cute pajamas Mikan, and Yami herself, getting the cards you need into your hand, including climaxes and events, is easy. But if your climaxes are in weird spot or your compression isn't great, Yamikan doesn't offer you amazing options. Overall, I give the deck a 6 out of 10 for consistency. So next is skill. If I was ever going to give a deck 10 out of 10 for skill rating, I think 2 Hilary would be it. The cards are all really techy, and given the deck's limited toolbox, using them correctly requires a highly tuned knowledge of the deck, its weaknesses and strengths, and a really healthy knowledge about your current matchup. A lot of the deck's strengths aren't super obvious, and it doesn't autopilot well at all. A newbie trying to pilot this deck is going to find himself with no cards in hand and 3 climaxes in stock very quickly. I think mastering the Yamikan in the English Weiss meta is probably one of the steepest climbs you can make as a player, and for that reason, I do give it a 10 out of 10. And finally, we close with power. Like we said before, the level 0 and level 1 game, aside from a very costly Yami change that's questionable to run anyway, don't give you too much in terms of presence or threat. The level 1 Mikans, even though they're free and can stick around with some hand encore, aren't tough to mow over. And the level 0s, while they give you options, don't give you dead characters, at least not on your opponent's side of the field. And finally, the level 3 game, since the level 2 is non-existent, doesn't give you a ton of extra damage or closing options. Project Darkness can give you a turn for redemption after your opponent tries to finish you off, but it's not super reliable. But that said, it's also by no means bad. Yami is a great level 3, even if she's not early played. Compare to cards like this Kirari from Idolmaster, which costs 4 stock to do the same thing and doesn't draw you cards. Given that, I give it a 7 out of 10. So judging by the numbers, you might think that this is a mediocre deck that takes a lot of time to get good with. But that's not really the case. Yamikan is a fun deck to play, and no other deck in English plays quite like it. It's uncommonly unique among decks, and it can do a lot of things that other decks can't. And if you're not playing the championship builds, how fun is it to dump a level 3 on the field at level 1? No, it's not Meta Sword Art, and it's not AOT, but Yamikan brings something really different to the table. And if you can track down the cards, I would recommend putting a deck together and going to town. Well, that's the end of this deck tech, folks. And again, this is like my opinion, man. And I don't think that any deck exemplifies how the whole is greater than the sum of its parts better than Yamikan. Against a seasoned player, you might think that on a card-to-card level you're really far ahead. But no matter how many favorable trades you seem to make, the Yamikan player never seems to have trouble laying down a field, and suddenly you're at level 3. And Project Darkness stops your finisher in your tracks. And after you're hit by all that, you're completely unable to stop the Golden Assassin from taking out her new target, you. Thanks for watching, players. Peace.